Hi, my name is Penny, and today I wanted to talk about the best first books in a series that I have read. So, this is a monthly recommendations group prompt, so I will leave the details to that group down below. But also, technically, I think this is meant to be a series where you thought the first book was the best book in the series, but actually, I'm just going to talk about series where I think the first book was really great and really made me want to continue the series. So I'm going to talk about 5 books because I find that's usually a good number of books to talk about, and it's also how many I found on my shelf. And the first book that I'm going to talk about, and I'm kind of going to do it in reverse goodness order, although to be honest, I struggled to put them in order, so I don't know how meaningful the order really is. But firstly, I'm going to talk about The Legend of Nightfall by Miki Zakarakurt. So I think originally this was actually released as a standalone, but there is a sequel called The Return of Nightfall. Or technically that makes it a series. Technically. The series is about a man called Nightfall who is one of the gifted. The gifts in this world, it's been a while since I read this, but the gifts in this world are treated as like demon curses, and so people who are gifted tend to keep them to themselves. Nightfall has this really interesting ability, which is part of why I really love this series, in that he can change his weight at will. So he uses it a lot in like battles and when he is running around. In fact, he is a thief, so he does a lot of running around. But it's just really interesting. I've never run across being able to change your weight used as a superpower before. Obviously, he can become really super light and increase his speed, be able to jump off tall buildings, or he can increase his weight when he's fighting to put more punch behind his punches. More weight behind his punches. You can tell I'm not a fighter. But yeah, in this book, he ends up getting caught and having to do the king a favor. Bad guys often end up getting tricked into doing good stuff like that. But I'm a big fan of anti-heroes, so I quite like that way of things. And from memory, this was really well written as well. So interesting concepts, well written. When I found out about the second book, I was so hyped to read it. I don't think it was quite as good as this one, but definitely recommend this book. Also, I love the cover art. Any cover art by Jodie A. Lee, I'm totally into. So then the next book I want to talk about is God's War by Cameron Hurley. I forget what the name of this series is. It's a trilogy. I think it's the Beldame something series. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. This book is about a woman called Nyx who is basically a bounty hunter, although she used to be a part of like the royal bounty hunters. That might not be entirely right, but she is, to be honest, a bit of a screw up, which is what I love about her. And so she's been kicked out of that group and she's now just basically trying to make a living, but she gets pulled into all sorts of political craziness all the time. I think what I loved about this book and also the rest of the series is just how dark and gritty it is. I also think the world's quite creative. Most of the technology is like insect or bug based, and there's some really gross and graphic parts in this book as well as the rest of the series. But basically in this book I fell in love with all of the characters and there was no way that I wasn't going to read the rest of the series. And I don't see many people talk about this series, so if you like science fiction with some icky bug stuff and a relatable rough character as your main protagonist, then I highly recommend this series. The next book I want to talk about is Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. So this is the first book of the Kate Daniels series, which is my all-time favorite series. I think that's a big call, but I do love this series. I think what makes it really strong is that it pulls in a whole bunch of different mythology and kinds of magic from all around the world, but specifically parts of the world that you don't get a lot of, or at least I don't read a lot of. You also have this world where magic is starting to come back in waves, and when magic waves are up, technology no longer works, but sometimes magic goes down again, technology works again. So it has this really interesting effect on the world where technology is no longer really relied upon. And so in some ways it's kind of a dystopian future, but when technology fails, there is magic to kind of fill in the holes. But also you have shape changes and vampires and gods and all sorts of craziness affecting the world as well. And Kate Daniels herself is a mercenary who basically gets herself in all sorts of trouble. I guess she's a little bit like Nyx from the previous series I just talked about, in that sometimes she's a bit of a screw up, but she's also a badass and gets shit done. And I love her. I want to be her. So when I read this book, just the characters and the world sucked me in, and I loved it so much that now I have all the rest of the books in the series. And this year, the last book in the series, book 10, comes out, and I'm so super excited. I'm going to reread the whole series, so I'm going to reread this book again soon, and I'm pretty excited about it. So the next book is a little bit of an obvious one, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is one where I do think it is the best book in the series so far. Of course, we're waiting for book number 3, although I don't expect we will get it for the next couple of years. But this tells the story of Quoth, who, I mean, very high level. He goes to study at the university, but it's told from the perspective of him telling his own story, and you're kind of waiting to find out how he got into the situation that he's in when he's telling the story. And it's just an amazing world with amazing magic systems, great writing style and storytelling. If you haven't read it yet, you should read it. The second book did get a bit long, and I think there was just too much to it. I really think the second book should have been broken down, and I know that there's a lot that needs to go into the third book, so I'm not sure how that's going to go, but I'm really looking forward to the release. And this first book, I reread it again recently, and I loved it possibly even more. So this definitely fits under best first book in a series. So the last book that I want to talk about is a bit of an emotional one. Is that the right word? Not sure. But that is The Ruins of Embryo by Melanie Rowan. My copy is a bit broken. It's not held together very well anymore. I probably might try and get my hands on a more solid copy at some point. But this series, the first 2 books in the series have been released, and then the third book, we have been waiting 17 years. Basically, Melanie Rowan had some personal dramas go on. She needed to sort out her life, so she put the series on hold and hasn't yet come back to it, although I believe she's working on the third book now, but because it's been such a long time, I think it's probably a bit of a struggle to write. But I still have my fingers crossed that she will manage it at some point. Regardless, I think the first 2 books of this series are solid enough to kind of stand on their own. And the first book in particular was a really great one for introducing quite a complex world and complex kind of political situation. Basically, it's about these 3 sisters. These 3 sisters who get born and for whatever reason, raised by different political factions. Each of them have different abilities, and they kind of get set up in this situation where they need to battle against each other. There's also a whole lot more going on in the series. I have at certain times thought about rereading it in order to remind myself of how good this series was. Then I keep telling myself, I'll wait until the third book's coming out and then I'll reread the series. But when will that be? Who knows? So maybe when I get the rest of my series in progress under control, I will look at rereading this series. It's amazingly complex and the characters are amazing. I don't think I can probably recommend it because, of course, if you read the first 2 books, you will be one of the many waiting for the third book. Although maybe if some of you were to go out and read the first 2 books of the series, that would help motivate Melanie Ron to finish the 3rd book. The covers, I think, are particularly beautiful. So there's this one, and there's also the next book in the series was this one. Look how nice this book is. Like, I have this completely tattered copy and this really beautiful one. But like, that art is just so lovely. So I hope when we finally get the 3rd book, the art will be just as lovely. But if you wanted to just buy these books to keep on your shelf and, you know, give Melanie Ron some money and some encouragement, then please do. So yeah, those are the best first books in a series that I found on my shelf. I would recommend pretty much all of them. As I said, that last one depends how charitable you're feeling. I'd love to hear what first book in the series you think are really great and that you would recommend. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.